Hello and welcome to today's session. My name is Martin, and together with my colleagues Franz and Jocelyn, we will present to you an overview of LoRaWAN security with a special focus on our new microcontroller STM32WL. But first, we would like to thank Things Conference for giving us the opportunity to share it with you. The recorded session will take approximately 55 minutes, and you can ask questions in the chat window at any time. At the end, we'll have a half-an-hour Q&A to answer as many questions as we can. I hope you enjoy. Security is becoming more and more important in today's world, and that's true especially for the IoT use case. Devices which are connected through public or private networks can be easy target for hackers, and that can result in massive loss of money or reputation. Luckily, security is deeply embedded into LoRaWAN specification. Devices need to authenticate before joining the network, and they also encrypt the application payload to communicate securely. ST offers multiple solutions to address security, including the secure firmware update and secure boot, the secure firmware install at untrusted manufacturer, the secure way of provisioning keys, and last but not least, it offers multiple hardware and software solutions embedded inside the STM32WL. So let's now have a look at the agenda. We will start with the specification of LoRaWAN focusing on security. In the next chapter, we will describe the building blocks which are necessary to build a secure end device. Then we will review the software and hardware measures that can be taken specifically on STM32WL. In the next chapter, we'll introduce key management services, and before the end, we'll describe secure firmware install, which is a solution to securely install firmware at untrusted manufacturer. And at the end, we will demonstrate the KMS. So let's get started. Let's start by LoRaWAN security reminder. On the left side, there are LoRaWAN end devices which are connected via gateways to the network server and then to the application server. The gateways work simply by forwarding the packets between the end device and the network server without any further logic. The application payloads are encrypted end-to-end thanks to the AES cipher, which ensures confidentiality of data. The packets exchanged between the end device and the network server are protected by message integrity check, which ensures authenticity and integrity of data. In case the packet is destined to the network server, which is the case for MAC commands, the payload can also be encrypted by a separate key. It's worth to mention that the communication between the network server and the application server is typically secured by some other IP technologies such as HTTPS or VPN. The security scheme of LoRaWAN relies on symmetric cryptography of AES cipher with a key size of 128 bits. The application session key is used to encrypt end-to-end the payloads between the end device and the application server, whereas the network session key is typically used to create the message integrity check between the end device and the network server. Both of these session keys should be unique per device. Before the end device can join the network, it needs to be activated, and there are two ways to do this: activation by personalization and over-the-air activation, which is also known as joint procedure. With activation by personalization, the session keys must be securely provisioned in advance into all devices. These keys remain the same for the lifetime of the product, which also limits the usage of an end device only to a pre-selected network. The network session key must be provisioned into the end device and to the network server, and the application session key must be provisioned to the end device and the application server. The secure provisioning of keys is outside of scope of LoRaWAN specification, but ST provides solution especially for the end device side. These solutions will be discussed later in this presentation. Let's summarize what information needs to be provisioned into an end device, which will be activated by personalization. So firstly, it's the application session key and the network session key. And secondly, it's the device address, which is a 32-bit identifier which identifies the device inside one particular network. Portion of this device address is the net ID. With over-the-air activation, the two session keys, the application and network, are derived dynamically from a shared secret called APP key. The procedure starts by end device sending a join request. It consists of the application unique identifier, also known as join unique identifier, which basically identifies a server which is able to process join request and knows the relationships between end device and application server. In our example, the join request will be processed by network server. Another field is device unique identifier, which uniquely identifies the end device itself, and a device nonce, which is just a randomly generated number. The join request is protected by the integrity check calculated from the APP key. When the network server receives the join request, it will derive the two session keys based on a certain formula. It will encrypt those two keys with the APP key and send it back to the end device. The application session key needs to be also sent to the application server, and it's a responsibility of backend to do it securely. Over-the-air activation is considered to be more flexible and secure compared to activation by personalization. To achieve over-the-air activation, the end device must be securely provisioned with the APP key, the device unique identifier, which identifies the device uniquely and on a global scale, and also by the application or join unique identifier, which identifies the server that knows the APP key and also the association between the end device and application servers. We can see the main assets are the keys, which needs to remain secret, and the information payload, which is sent over LoRaWAN network. The threats can be classified into two separate categories: the inner attack, where the hacker gains access by injecting the code into our system, and the outer attack, where the hacker spies the communication remotely or has a physical access to the board. STM32WL offers multiple countermeasures, either software or hardware, that can mitigate these threats. The previous slide was really just a summary of the security analysis. Here I put you a link on an ARM website that shows a real and full example of the threat model security analysis for smart water meter. It will show a real assets to protect, threats and mitigations.
In this chapter, I would like to give you a security overview for the LoRaWAN device. What makes a LoRaWAN device secure? First, you need to ensure your device is using a genuine firmware. By genuine, I mean you assure this one has not been modified. This is the integrity check. And this one is the one that you created. This is the authenticity check. Those problematics could be addressed by a secure boot. Then you need to have the capability to upgrade the embedded firmware in a secure way. And in a secure way, here you will check the integrity and the authenticity of the new firmware before installing it. But you can also need to ensure about the confidentiality of it. That means this new firmware will be transmitted encrypted. And for sure, to guarantee the security of your system, you need to keep your secret, I would say secret. For this purpose, you will use all the security features possible, hardware or software, to achieve the level of security you targeted. A secure boot should have two main properties. First one, it should be immutable. That means it can't be modified in any manner. Second one, your system should always boot on the secure boot and not on another piece of code. The combination of those properties creates the root of trust of your system. But what does the secure boot code? First, it will check that all the static security of your system has been properly activated. Then it will activate the dynamic securities. Once that's done, it will authenticate the current installed firmware and will launch it, obviously, if the authentication succeeds. Those tasks of authenticity and integrity check will rely on cryptography, so usage of key that you will need to protect. The secure firmware update capability is also needed. This new firmware could be received thanks to a local link, USART or USB for example, but it can be also received over the air. This is what we call FUTA, Firmware Update Over the Air. In this case, due to the RF bandwidth, the capability to update a portion of the firmware or not the complete firmware is somehow needed. We also call this functionality a partial update. Once the new code is downloaded, the authenticity and the integrity should be checked before installation. Potentially, you can also decrypt if the firmware has been encrypted. Again, all those mechanisms rely on cryptography and some keys that you will need to protect. As previously seen, Secure Boot and Secure Firmware Update rely on the usage of cryptographic keys. Those keys are static, that means predefined and embedded within the code. The provisioning of those keys are linked with the flash process of the first firmware inside the MCU. Either you have a trusted secure flash environment, or you can also use secure firmware install process if available on your target. We will give you more detail about the SFI later in this presentation. LoRaWAN security also rely on cryptographic keys. Those ones could be updatable. In this case, the key value can be updated in a non-volatile memory storage via a secure procedure using static embedded root key. Once provisioned, those updatable keys cannot be deleted. This functionality is provided by a key management service and the import service. But after the provisioning, you also need to minimize the key value exposure during its usage. This is addressed by KMS, which allows to use key without manipulating its value but an associated identifier. We will give you more detail about KMS later in this presentation. Here is an example of provision scheme for activation by personalization. On product line, we will rely on the secure firmware install process to flash the first binary. This first binary embedded the static keys. Before deploying your LoRaWAN device, you can rely on the KMS key management services to provision application session key and the network session key in a secure way. We will transmit the blob, which is a kind of container, with the two keys value. Those keys value are encrypted. Associated with them, we've got some metadata which allow the KMS to check the integrity and the authenticity of those keys before install them inside the system. Once this provisioning has been done by the KMS, your device is ready to connect to the LoRaWAN network. In this part, I would like to introduce you the STM32WL hardware and software security mechanism available. STM32WL, single core or dual core, have some common security mechanism that you can also find on other STM32 family. We've got the bootlock mechanism, readout protection, tamper detection, proprietary code readout protection, also named PCROP, write protection, and the memory protection unit. Those mechanisms can address different types of attack. For example, readout protection and tamper detection will address some outer attack, while PCROP and write protection will address outer and inner attack. The MPU is an isolation mechanism and will address inner attack. All those mechanisms combined together allow you to achieve a certain level of security. On the STM32WL single core, ST delivered a code example of secure boot and secure firmware update, which rely on some of those mechanisms. It allows to ensure firmware authenticity and integrity. It allows also to update the firmware in a secure way, thanks to local loader which rely on wire modem protocol. Two main security features are using RDP plus write protect, but those ones are not activated by default. This is the first level of security which allows you to protect against any attack via JTAG. But beware, as we don't have any isolation in our example, it means the surface of attack includes all the internal flash, application, and a ref stack. This example is delivered in the Cube firmware, and the name is BFU_1_image. _1 image is because it's a single slot, and there is a local loader and KMS included in this example. On this slide, I want to give you some details about the memory organization and the different security mechanisms that are activable on this example. As you can see on the user flash, we've got the secure engine keys, which are the static key. Secure engine code, BFU, and KMS code are protected by the write protection. Then we've got the region of KMS data storage, where you will store your updatable keys. The download blob slot, which allows to download a new blob and to provision new keys. Then you've got the active image header, where is located the metadata of the installed firmware. And then your firmware, which is a LoRaWAN application. The different security mechanisms activable or activated in this example are the independent watchdog, the tamper detection, the write protection combined with the RDP level 2, which ensure the immutability of your code, and also the bootlock mechanism. STM32WL dual core brings some additional mechanism. Isolation of the core M0 Plus for memory and peripheral, the privilege protection for memory and peripheral, the secure memory, also called HDP, the debug core M0 Plus access, and the bootlock mechanism on the core M0 Plus also. I will detail all those mechanisms in the next slide. New Cortex M0 security feature bring a strong isolation. Portion of flash and RAM could be assigned to the Cortex M0. We can also assign UBGHz, iOS, PK, and TrueNG to the Cortex M0, and also some DMA channel. Some resource protection could be based on privilege, and we will see also that we can restrict debug to certain portion of memory. We have a bootlock mechanism now for the Cortex M0 and also for the Cortex M4. Cortex M0 Plus security flash isolation. To define this portion of flash that could be exclusive accessed by the Cortex M0 Plus, we need to define two option bytes. The first one is to enable the security, FSD, flash security disable. If you set it to 0, then you will enable the security. Then you just have to define the secure flash start address. And from this address until the end of the flash, everything will be assigned to the Cortex M0 Plus. Another feature for security flash isolation is HDP, Hide Memory Protection. It allows to make disappear memory from the system after its execution. You just need to activate it thanks one option byte, hide protection disable, that you should set to 0. Then you define the hide protection start address. And from this address until the end of the flash, it will be the secure hide protected region. As for the flash isolation, we have RAM isolation. We can define portion of SRAM that could be only accessed by the Cortex-M0. To configure this feature, first you need to have the security enabled. To do this, you need to have the option byte FSD set to 0. Then you have to activate the RAM security. For this, you've got one option byte for the SRAM1, NBRSD, and one for the SRAM2, BRSD. NBRSD stands for Non-Backup SRAM Security Disable, and BRSD, Backup SRAM Security Disable. As you can see, the logic is negative. That means you need to set to 0 to activate this feature. The last point is to define this RAM start address to define the location of the SRAM1 or SRAM2 that would be protected. Sub-GHz radio system could be also exclusively accessible by the secure Cortex-M0. This is configured again thanks an option byte. Some peripheral could be assigned to the secure CM0 or the non-secure CM4. This is done through the security controller part of the global security controller. So secureable IP are AES, PKI, and through RNG. The allocation is done dynamically. That means based on your needed, you can assign them to the secure CM0 or the non-secure CM4. You can do the similar things with the DMA channel, but this time it's not saying the security controller, but directly in the IP of the DMA. Here it's also done at runtime. Privilege protection is an additional isolation mechanism that you can configure inside the global security controller. It applies on memories, flash SRAM, and is configured thanks watermark for them, and also on the sub-GHz radio, AES, PKI, through RNG, and DMA channel. Any legal access to the secure and/or privileged resources can be signaled to the Cortex-M0. This is done thanks to the Secure Illegal Access Controller, part of the Global Security Controller. Then it's up to the Cortex-M0 firmware to take the action. Any illegal access will wake up the Cortex-M0 from any operating state. Another security feature is the capability to disable the debug port access of the Cortex-M0 Plus. By default, the value is set thanks to the option byte DDS. Then it can be dynamically changed by the software embedded. One of the key requirements for security is to ensure you're always booting on an immutable code. To ensure the code location that is executed after boot, we've got some additional option bytes that have been defined. We've got a boot lock for the CPU1 and the C2 boot lock on the CPU2. This will guarantee our chain of trust. As on the single core, ST delivers code examples of secure boot and secure firmware update, which rely on those new security mechanisms and in such a way increase the security level of your system. The additional mechanisms are HTTP, MPU, and Cortex-M0 plus isolation. There is two examples, one with a SBSFU plus a KMS and a local loader, and another one with a FUTA, firmware update over the air with a LoRaWAN stack. This diagram shows the memory organization and the associated protection of a full SBSFU. On the CM0 Plus, in privilege mode, the most sensitive code and data. If you have a look in the top address of the flash, which is the bottom on this diagram, you find first the header or the metadata of each firmware that's running on each core. Then you've got the static cryptographic keys. Then you've got the secure engine, which will operate all the cryptographic operation. In addition to the secure privilege protection, HTTP is used to protect the key and the headers. In unprivileged mode, we have SBSFU on KMS interface code, the KMS data storage, and the LoRaWAN middleware and radio. This last firmware could be updated. Isolation between the KMS storage and the LoRaWAN middleware and radio is addressed thanks MPU. All the SRAM2 is dedicated to the CM0+, with a similar split between privileged and unprivileged. On the CM4, a secure boot is also needed to ensure about the secure boot process on this core. This one will be write protected and a bootlock mechanism will be activated. The LoRaWAN application on the downloading slot will be located in this non-secure unprivileged area. This slide is somehow complex because you've got a lot of information. The purpose is really to show you the different isolations that have been activated in this example, but you can find much more detail in the SBSFU documentation. This slide sums up the different protection on the hardware and software availability in the context of secure boot and secure firmware update. I will not comment in detail this array. The main message is that on the single core, secure boot and secure firmware update mainly rely on RDP and write protection. This allows to address only outer attack via debugging link. Activating the MPU isolation would be possible, but due to the complexity, it has not been considered as a mass market solution. PCROP mechanism has not been used to ease the KMS integration. This is the first level of security. But if you need also to address inner attack, the STM32WL dual core is a ready-to-use solution from the hardware and software point of view. As conclusion to this comparison, I want to insist in the fact that on the single core, any successful inner attack can lead to the loss of the confidentiality of all assets inside your device. This could be mitigated using MPU mechanism, but this would increase the implementation complexity. On this slide, you can find links to the user manual and the integration guide of SBSFU in the STM32CubeWL. The main purpose of the key management system is to unify the way to manage and use cryptographic key in your platform. To minimize the key value exposure, each key will have a unique identifier, and the API will rely on this unique identifier. ST implemented the standard API PKCS11. The main services of this system, management of cryptographic objects like key or certificate, and classical services like encryption, decryption, signature generation and verification, key derivation or generation. In the KMS, we've got three main categories of key. Static embedded key are predefined and embedded in the code. They can be updated. Then we've got the updatable keys with static ID. The ID is predefined in the system, but the key value is updatable afterward in a secure way. In a secure way means integrity, authenticity, and confidentiality of the value of the key is guaranteed using some static embedded root key. Last category is the updatable key with dynamic ID. The key value is created using an internal function, typically a key derivation from another key. Here is an overview of the KMS system. At the first step, only static embedded keys are available. KMS allows to provision new key value for a predefined identifier. For this, we will need to generate a container also called blob. In this blob, we will have the new key value, which is encrypted. Associated with this one, we've got some metadata which allow the KMS to check integrity and authenticity of this encrypted key before installing it. Then the application could use those keys through identifier than the PKCS 11 API. Application can also create new keys using internal function. Thanks to the software architecture, you can easily isolate the KMS from the rest of your platform, thanks to hardware mechanism available on your target. This slide shows how the key provisioning thanks KMS is integrated with SBSFU in our code example. The key value to provision is encrypted. This encrypted value and some associated metadata will be stored in a container called a blob. The metadata include a header with a magic, a protocol version, a blob version, a blob size, and the hash of the key value to provision. Metadata also includes the signature of this header. To provision a new key, the blob should be downloaded inside the downloading slot. This will be addressed by the loader of our system. The new blob then will be detected on the SBSFU execution. On this one, we'll call the secure update services of the KMS. The procedure then is to check the header signature on the static key. This will guarantee the authentication and the integrity of the header. Then the key value will be decrypted and the hash of the content in clear will be checked. If those steps are OK, then the key value will be stored inside the non-volatile memory associated with the predefined identifier. The key value is now provisioned and could be used securely. ST delivers the KMS middleware in the STM32WL Cube firmware package. You can also find some basic examples, but also some more advanced examples with a full integration of the KMS with the SBSFU.
In this section, I will present you the secure firmware install. SFI addresses the production of the chips. There are different reasons why you want to secure your production. First one is the confidentiality of the content of your firmware, because the firmware you write in the flash contains your intellectual property. In case you use a secure boot, it also contains the keys used by your secure boot to manage authenticity check and also the update firmware description key. One other reason is that you want to avoid overproduction that would lead to have your product on gray market. ST provides a mechanism that ensures the firmware installation will be secure. This mechanism is available on the STM32WL dual core only. One point to raise is that the SFI only addresses firmware installation. It is not designed to be used for key provisioning. Let's give you an overview of this SFI mechanism. First, let's start with the standard non-secure production. You have your firmware to download on the target, usually a .x file or just a binary. You also probably need to define the option bytes to set up on the target, at least to close the device using RDP level 1 or RDP level 2. Then you need to send this data to your contract manufacturer. Contract manufacturer uses a programmer to flash the target chips. Now, the secure firmware install means you encrypt the data you send to your manufacturer. So firmware and option bytes are gathered in an encrypted file. To encrypt this file, you need a key. SFI uses AES-GCM cryptography to generate a .sfi file. Once your firmware is encrypted, you can send it to the contract manufacturer safely. Contract manufacturer receives this file but cannot decrypt it. The programmer will send the encrypted file to the target device, STM32WL55 for instance. Now, how STM32WL can decrypt this file? Device first needs some embedded code to manage this decryption. The code embedded in the device is in the system flash like the system bootloader, but it is secured. This means this code is not accessible to JTAG or even use the code in Flash. It also needs to get the encryption key in some way. The encryption key has to be transferred to the manufacturer in the secured way so that only the target STM32 can use it. To do that, we use a smart card as a locker. It is called HSM for Hardware Security Module. So, when you encrypt your firmware, you use an AES key. This key should be provisioned to the HSM. Once the firmware encryption key is provisioned in the HSM, there is no way to extract it. The contract manufacturer will receive this HSM and connect it to the programmer. Now, let's describe how STM32 gets the firmware encryption key. The firmware first requests the certificate of the STM32. This certificate was programmed inside the ST factory and signed with ST secret key. The certificate is transmitted to the smart card. The smart card can verify the authenticity of this certificate thanks to ST's public key. Then the smart card uses the STM32 public key provided in this certificate to encrypt the firmware encryption key. This encrypted data is put in a license file. Then the programmer retrieves this license file from the smart card and just forwards it to the target. The secure code embedded in the chip can decrypt the firmware encryption key thanks to its private key. It is now ready to receive the encrypted firmware in .sfi file format. The received content is decrypted and programmed in the chip. As you can see, the firmware encryption key was never exposed in untrusted environment. This is what makes the firmware installation secure. Now let me present you a demo of key provisioning using our code example provided in the STM32WL Cube firmware. ST delivers a code example of SBSFU including the KMS. So the goal of this demo is to show you the basic security bricks that are provided with the STM32WL. In this demo, we will use one of the examples provided in the Cube firmware package of the STM32WL. And this example is able to run on single or dual core. And here we are using a dual core target, but it's only using the M4 of this dual core. This example provides a secure boot, which is the standard SBSFU implementation, set up in one image mode. This SBSFU is able to manage the download of new firmware using the Y-modem protocol. The main features demonstrated here, is the KMS. The KMS is the key management system. The code of this key management system is located in the secure engine of the SBSFU. It is managing two different kinds of keys in this demo. The embedded keys, which are located inside the secure engine, and the static keys that are dynamically provisioned. They are located in a reserved area in the flash called KMS data storage. To be able to manage key provisioning, a small memory slot reserved for this purpose is in the flash. A blob is a set of data containing the keys to be imported. the data is encrypted and signed the same way it is done for a firmware update file. So the new keys are important, also the same mechanism as it is used for firmware update. In this demo, we will use different embedded keys. First, the keys used to decrypt and authenticate the firmware. The keys used to authenticate and decrypt the blob, which are different, and also two keys used for testing purpose. And then we will have two static keys that will be provisioned, and one is a RSA key and the other is an AES key. Now, just before going to the demo, let me show you the flash mapping of this demo. The low address of the flash are on the top of the figure, so we can see the secure engine containing the embedded keys and the KMS code, and then the secure firmware, boot secure firmware update that is able to download the new firmware. And then the KMS data storage used to store the static keys that will be provisioned, and the download blob area that will receive the blob before the installation. And next is the active image header for authenticating the application and the application itself. That is actually an example provided in the project. The two main protections used in this setup are the RDP, readout protection, that ensures the unique boot entry for the secure boot, and the inability to access to the flash using the debugger. And the second protection is the write protection, WRP, that ensures the immutability of the secure boot and the embedded keys. Let's now switch to the demo itself. So our demo is based on the Cube firmware for WL v.1.0.0, where you have the standard directory tree. So let's go to the example in Nucleo, Project Nucleo applications, and the demo will use this BFU one image. We have 4 projects in this application, the secure engine Corbin and the BFU, that is a SBSFU, so it has a standard SBSFU projects and a user application. And on top of that, we have this KMS blob that is used to generate a blob. So let's go to our STM32 Cube ID, where I already loaded these projects, and let's compile them. So first we need to compile the SE Corbin. I launch this SE Corbin, and you can see that there is a pre-build launch at the beginning, and the purpose of this pre-build is to inject all the embedded keys that are needed, so for firmware authentication, blob authentication, and also the 2 keys used for the testing that we will see later. So here in the SE Corbin we have the Secure Engine framework, including the KMS core and also the embedded keys. Then we build the SBSFU, which is the code that manages the secure boot, secure firmware update, so the authentication of the application, and also it manages the installation of the new application and the installation of the blobs. Then we'll build the user application, which is a demo application, and this At the end of this build, we will have a post build that will generate in the user application binary some binaries. So here you can see it is generating intermediate files, and then we have our two files, the one binary containing the SBSFU and the user application that will download on the target, and a user app.sfb, which is an update file that is encrypted and signed. So let's open the QProgrammer and connect to the target. So we have here a target STM32WL. You can see it here. And we will download this file to the target. So here it is already prepared. So I select this file, and it just before I launch the TerraTerm. So I have the TerraTerm that is outputting the traces of the SBSFU. So I start programming, and at the end of the programming, the SBSFU is launched automatically. So we have here the traces of the secure boot. We can see that it is checking for a new firmware to download, and also checking for a new blob to install. And if nothing is needed for installation, then it is checking the active firmware authentication. So it authenticates the firmware. If the firmware is okay, then it is launched by the secure boot. Then from here we have the example firmware, the user application, with a kind of a menu, and we will use this test KMS. So I press A, and you can see that we have two first tests using embedded keys and two tests using static keys. I press 1 to launch the first test. You can see that it is running successfully because the key is already there, and we can use it. The user application is actually using KMS services to be able to perform this encryption and decryption without having access to the key itself. Just a service providing a key index that you want to use. And same for the second, so I press 2. I have also this second test with AES-CBC with encryption and decryption. Next, if I want to launch the test number 4 using, so I press 4, you can see that the test is failing. And the reason is that the key is not imported yet, so the key is not available on the target. So here we need to import dynamically using this import blob the keys necessary to the two last tests. So to achieve this, let's go back to our project and select the KMS blob. This KMS blob is a project containing only one C file, and this C file is containing a blob structure with all the keys that you want to import. So here we import RSA key, and we also import AES key, and you can see that there is a parameter that tells that you can derive the key. So this means that KMS has associates to each key the actions that are authorized, and here we can use a derivation for this key, for instance. So here are the keys you want, the static keys you want to import to your target. To do that, just launch the build, and this build will generate here in the blob project in binary, it is generating this file. So this file is the blob, which contains the two keys that are defined here. The two keys are encrypted using this CBC key, and they are signed using this ECC key. Then on the target, we have already embedded the associated public key of this ECC key and also this symmetric key, so that the SBSFU will be able to decrypt and authenticate the content of the blob. So let's see how we can do that. We go back to our TerraTerm and import the blob. I press 3, and here we have the Y-modem interface to import the blob. We use the Y-modem interface, and I'm already here in the good directory because I prepared this demo before. So I press the blob, KMS blob, and it is transferring the blob. You remember in the flash area dedicated to this transfer. And after this transfer made by the application itself, the application is rebooting, giving back the hand to the secure boot. And secure boot, one of the steps is the checking if there is a blob to install. And here it has detected this blob that is still encrypted. So it is decrypting it and checking the authentication. And once this authentication is okay, it installs the keys in the key store of the KMS. So it calls the SBSFU calls the secure engine to and the KMS service needed to install the keys. And once this installation is done, the process goes on to launch the firmware, that is still check authentication of the firmware. And we can check what we can do now that we have made the import. We can use this key. So I press 4, and you can see that we can use the RSA key to generate a signature, because RSA here is a private key. And the second test also, we can make a derivation using this AES key. In conclusion, let me come back to a slide presented previously, where we could see on the left side the device with its secure boot, secure firmware update, and embedded keys that is able to run but has not been provisioned yet. And then the blob that is used to provision the keys dynamically where you want on the field, even in untrusted areas, so that you have a device that is fully functional. So the solution we propose using this KMS allows this dynamic provisioning. Thank you for your attention.